in the linguistic WhatsApp, we need to do a midterm exam. Okay, and aside from the midterm exam, the lectures are done. We have done 2 quizzes. So my part for assessment, 2 quizzes, and what is it just now? 2 quizzes and midterm exam. And then I don't know whether there was work. Was there? The submitted works were actually if I needed to, some grades are not doing well. I don't know. It's extra consideration. Okay. So today we're going to talk about sociolinguistics. Sociolinguistics. So socio is sociology, and the study of sociology is basically the study of the society, the community, the people in the community. And then we look at linguistics. So we know what linguistics is. So now it is a connection between linguistics and society, and they call it sociolinguistics. All right. I have recorded. Now I want to share. I want us to watch a video, a short video about 12 minutes. I need to include the computer sound. Okay. Let's see if I don't think you can see this, huh? What is this now? I want to go to YouTube. Can you see the YouTube?
Yes, doctor.
Oh, you can see, huh?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much. All right, so hopefully the audio will help us this time. Okay, so I'm going to start. All right.
Hey, how you doing? Hey, yeah. What's up, bruh? Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for joining me. In this video, I will be discussing sociolinguistics, which is the study of the relationship between language and society. In this video, I'll be discussing the concepts of differentiating between languages and dialects, the concept of a dialect.
I'm sorry. What?
Continuum, isoglosses, dialect boundaries, the notion of an accent, and slang. Let's get started. There's an estimated 5,000 to 7,000 languages in use today. That includes spoken and signed languages. Now you might wonder, why such a broad range? Why can't we pinpoint the exact number of languages by counting them? And the answer is that the distinction between a language and a dialect is not always clear. So one language may have multiple dialects, and each dialect may enjoy different levels of prestige. So depending on who's doing the counting, a specific dialect or language may not even be counted at all. Now, of course, we as linguists approach the study of language descriptively, not prescriptively. So we recognize that no language or dialect is inherently better than another language or dialect. However, in the real world, the fact of the matter is that some dialects and languages are more stigmatized than others. So, for example, received pronunciation, a dialect of British English, enjoys higher prestige compared to, say, Southern American English. And this is evidenced by the fact that if, for example, you turn on your television and watch a national news broadcast, the anchor is very likely not to use Southern American English. Now, very generally, dialects are mutually intelligible, whereas languages are mutually unintelligible. So if I'm speaking to you and I understand you and you understand me, then we're probably speaking the same language. Whereas if I don't understand you and you don't understand me, we're probably not speaking the same language. Now this is easy enough in theory, but in practice it becomes complicated because dialects exist along what is called a dialect continuum. A dialect continuum is a situation in which a large number of contiguous dialects exist, and each of those dialects is mutually intelligible with the next, but with dialects at the opposite ends of the spectrum being mutually unintelligible. Now let me give you an example from English. So I speak Western American English, and Western American English as a dialect is contiguous with or neighbors with Southern American English, which I can also understand. Southern American English in turn neighbors with Eastern American English, and I could pretty much understand that with relative ease. But if we take a dialect at the other end of the continuum in English, say Scottish English, now the differences are really pronounced. So even though Western American English and Scottish English are drawing from essentially the same grammatical system, the differences in the lexicon, or vocabulary, and pronunciation are so different that you could be forgiven if you mistook Western American English and Scottish English as different languages entirely. So the notion of a dialect is intricately bound up with this concept of an accent. Now, an accent often has a really negative connotation when people say, oh, so-and-so has an accent, or I'm embarrassed to talk because I have an accent. From a linguistics perspective, an totally neutral idea because everyone has an accent. If someone's speaking a language, they're going to be speaking a dialect of that language. And if they're speaking a dialect of that language, they're going to have an accent. So an accent, therefore, are really just aspects of pronunciation that help identify where we are from, whether regionally or socially. So the important thing to understand is that an accent is not just a regional phenomenon in terms of where you're from and where you were raised. It's also a social one. So depending on certain demographic factors like age, gender, socioeconomic status, your accent will be different from your peers. And that's a perfectly normal thing in the study of language. Now, one of the most well-known studies in sociolinguistics that highlights the close relationship between dialect and accent and prestige comes from William Labov, who in the 1960s studied R-lessness among English speakers in New York City's department stores. So very briefly, R-lessness just has to do with either the presence or absence of the R sound in some words. So for example, if I say the phrase, I parked my car in Harvard Yard, I'm using the R sound, but if I say I parked my car in Harvard Yard, I'm not using the R sound. So this was really the focus of Labov's study. So what he did is to kind of talk to salespeople from 3 department stores in New York City on the assumption that salespeople from those department stores would try to match the language of their customers. And this is a well-known phenomenon in sales today. So what he would do is he would go to these 3 department stores which had very different levels of prestige. One was Saks Fifth Avenue, which was treated as the high prestige store in his study, Macy's, which was the middle prestige store, and S. Klein, which was the low store in his study. So he went to each of those stores and basically asked questions of the salespeople that elicited the response, 4th floor. And he used that phrase specifically because there's 2 opportunities to hear the R sound, in 4th and again in floor. So he would ask the salespeople, for example, excuse me, where are men's shoes located? And the salesperson would say, oh, they're on the 4th floor. But then he would lean in and pretend not to have heard them, asking them to repeat it. And they would say, they're on the 4th floor. So not only in the use of the phrase 4th floor are there two opportunities to hear the R sound, but there's also a casual and a more careful pronunciation that is provided by the salespeople. So this is something we typically do when somebody asks us to repeat a bit of information. We give them a little bit more of a careful pronunciation, right? So this was a very clever method that he was using, and the results supported his hypothesis. So what he found was that salespeople from the store with the highest prestige, Saks Fifth Avenue, those salespeople were more likely to use R in their speech compared to salespeople from the store with the lowest prestige, S. Klein. They were much less likely to use R in their speech. Or, to put it another way, salespeople from Saks Fifth Avenue were more likely to say 4th floor, whereas salespeople from S. Klein were more likely to say 4th floor. So what this highlights here is, again, that variation in sociolinguistics is not just about the geographical variety, where you are from. It's also about where you are from socially. So again, age, socioeconomic status, gender, these things can affect our accent and maybe more generally our dialect as speakers. And that's perfectly natural. This study, again, remains one of the most famous to this day, and this is why we call William Labov the father of variationist sociolinguistics. So now that we've differentiated between a language and a dialect, and we've discussed dialects in terms of existing on a continuum, now let's address the question of, well, how do we know where one dialect stops and another begins? And as you may have guessed, this answer is not always clear, but there is one concept that's really useful here, and that is the notion of an isogloss. An isogloss is a boundary that separates the use of one linguistic form from another linguistic form. Now, this is not a political boundary, mind you. An isogloss really corresponds to some sort of prominent geographic boundary, such as a mountain range or a broad river, which in the past served as real barriers that prevented groups of speakers from interacting freely with one another, right? It's not so easy to climb over a mountain range or cross a broad river to talk to people on the other side. So I could propose that there is actually an isogloss that corresponds with the Sandia Mountains. So I live in Albuquerque, New Mexico, which is nestled at the base of the Sandia Mountains. And on the other side of the Sandia Mountains, going east and headed towards Texas, I think that there are some differences in how words are used and how words are pronounced. So, for example, I could propose an isogloss where on the other side of the Sandia Mountains, speakers are more likely to use the word y'all to refer to the second person plural. Whereas on this side, or in Albuquerque, on that side of the isogloss, speakers you all, or the second person plural form. So again, we're just looking at one linguistic form here. I could also propose another isogloss where, for example, east of the Sandia Mountains, speakers are more likely to merge the vowels I and eh in the pronunciation of certain words. So, for example, the words pin and pen are two different pronunciations for me. So I'll say I need to put a pin on my coat, or I need to write with a pen. So they have different vowels in each of those words. But east of the Sandia Mountains, speakers are more likely to merge those pronunciations into one single form, so that a speaker east of the Sandia Mountains is more likely to say, I need to put a pin on my coat and I need a pin to write with. So this pin-pen merger is well documented in linguistics and again represents another possible isogloss. So as these isoglosses accumulate in the same geographical location, this gives linguists cause to propose a dialect boundary. So a dialect boundary is really nothing more than a bundle of isoglosses. Finally, let's discuss the concept of slang. Slang is words and phrases, informal language that are typically used by younger speakers to reinforce group membership. So as I mentioned in my language change video, language changes from one generation of speakers to the next. As long as there are speakers around, language will change, and that's a perfectly natural phenomenon. Although many older speakers of a language really don't like language change, and I'm thinking specifically in terms of slang here. So maybe you have grandparents or parents who just kind of deride the use of slang among kids these days, or very generally just rail against the way younger speakers use the English language. Well, like I said, language change is perfectly natural, but a lot of people do have well-entrenched beliefs that just, never seem to go away about how language should be used. So slang constantly shifts from one generation to the next. So, some terms like tubular, far out, groovy, they've really fallen out of use, but we may see the same for slang terms that are used these days. So, lit, on fleek, yeet, these may disappear sometime in the future as well. They might stick around. We're not so sure. So the really interesting thing here about slang is that everyone is an expert. And along those lines, I'd be really curious if you could post a comment below and provide an example of slang that you use or that you have heard, and let's talk about it. So will it have a long shelf life or will it disappear soon? I'd be curious to know your thoughts on that as well. Okay, that's it for this video. I hope you found this useful. Thank you so much for watching, and in the meantime, I'll see you soon. Take care.
All right. All right, so short and sweet, the video is. What is this? Oh, I meant to open this. Okay, so the video basically talks about sociolinguistics and what people do when they use language. So when what people do, meaning people are the community, and the community forms a society. So what the society does with a language. All right. He puts it nicely that language versus dialect. So he says that a language has many dialects. So if you think about Malay dialects, we have many Malay dialects. North, south, east, west, northern dialects, west coast dialect, east coast dialect. So those are Malay dialects. Dialect Utara, dialect Negeri Sembilan, dialect Kelantan, Terengganu, and everything. And but then he says, then he compares that with dialect, and he says that among the dialects, there are some dialects which are more prestigious than the other. Okay, so he was saying, like, if you speak like received pronunciation, which is spoken by the British in a formal situation, it is more prestigious than compared to if you were using Malaysian English, Malaysian spoken English, right? So in dialects, he actually showed that there is a close connection between the society and the language. And he was talking about a very famous study by William Labov. Very simple study, but it shows how the facet to it, which is we were talking about, and I think he was saying, and I was saying also, like the dialects can be, when I say north, south, east, west, those are geographical, right? But he's saying that the interaction between society and language can also happen with socio dialects, sociolects he calls it. So a study that William Labov did is they went and asked salesperson from 3 different stores in a New York City shopping area. One is high-end Saks, Secondly is Macy, which is middle income. And then Klein, S. Klein is the low income people who goes to that kind of. So he says the way people pronounce, and the thing was they just asked, where is the men's department, you know, and then how the salesperson respond by saying fourth floor or fourth floor. That means the R is very prominent versus the R not being prominent. It shows that it has some connection between whether it's at the high-end store, which is the Saks, and the low-end store, which is S. Klein. Okay, so that is a very nice experiment that shows how close the connection between language and society. In fact, if the society that speaks the language is slowly dying off, for example, orang asli misalnya, so there are communities of orang asli which is slowly dwindling in size. I have a friend, researcher from Lund University, who comes here every year to do studies on Jahai people. So Jahai people is a group of orang asli who lives in the border of northern Kelantan and Perak, near Greek, that side. So they're called Jahai people. Currently, there's only about 300 of them. The whole community is only 300. So after time, due to intermarriage, due to people migrating outside of the community to work, to Kuala Lumpur or to Kota Baru, for example, that society will dwindle. So it was fortunate that he actually documented that language lah. And once the society is gone, most probably the language will be gone, unless that language is studied for academic reasons. So you see Latin, there's no community which uses Latin anymore, but it's still being studied as an academic subject. So Latin is still around. You can actually study Latin at universities. Yeah, like classical Arabic. The language that's being used in the Quran, Holy Quran. That's the only place that we can find classical Arabic. There's no speakers of classical Arabic. Right now we have a modern Arabic. So that is the nice, connection between, between society and language. Okay, so today we're going to talk about that, sociolinguistics exploration. We might have to finish before I finish my slides, but I think it's something that interesting in the sense that it's different from what we've been doing before. What we were doing before, we're doing grammar, syntax, morphology. This is a very relaxed one that you can read and understand. And also you can read the chapter in your textbook on sociolinguistics. Okay, so you can hear me, right? All right, okay, so what are the fundamental questions? Yeah. So what is the relationship between language and culture? Because when you talk about society, you're talking about culture. Society has cultures that they adopt. So their way of life. How they eat, how they do their cleaning, either self-cleaning or cleaning of their environment is different. So these differences in the way of life is culture. And we humans are the only animals to have culture. And humans are the only animal to have language. So then, of course, the connection between language and culture. How do the two connect? What is language? And language is what the system of language that we use, or the medium in which some communication takes place, or the medium of which a particular society speak. So 3 views about language. One is language as grammar. So I can say safely that when I was talking to you about morphology, about syntax, about semantics, maybe semantics is half of it. That is language as grammar. Okay. So when we talk about language as grammar, it is formal, it is prescriptive, descriptive. Yeah, it is a system of rules. Can. And then language as communication, we have not looked at it, language as communication, but maybe in this short lecture, or in the slides, we might see how language function as communication. But basically, language is the conduit. Language is the conduit that we use to communicate with one another, the medium. And language as a thing, language to be studied. Yeah, so like my friend just now, Dr. Nicholas, he studied the Jahai language. So Jahai language becomes a thing that he studies. Okay, this is the infamous Noam Chomsky. He was born in 1928. He's very old now, but he's still active, especially now he's into politics. He's a political commentary. But he came up with a new way of, in 1959, he came up with universal grammar. Before that, they were using verbal behavior by B.F. Skinner before 1959. But and Chomsky was a proponent. He assumed behaviorism, which is verbal behavior. But he changed the whole way of thinking about language in 1959 by postulating universal grammar, difference between surface structure and deep structure. So as we know, there are 3 subsystems of grammar. They are representational, phonology, graphic, gestural. This one we have not studied. This one I think, I hope Dr. Badrul Zaman will do it, phonetics and phonology. And then we have lexical, which is morphology, and syntactic. So how can we communicate using language? We can communicate through written language, which is called text. The interaction of people. When we read books, we are interacting with one another, We are interacting with the authors. The authors is interacting with the reader. Interpretation of text is also a form of communication. That means after we've read something, we think about it, we analyze. For some people, they actually write a commentary on what they have read or talk about it. Yeah, like recently I was invited to review a book, an autobiography of someone from Indonesia, very remarkable guy. And after I've read his manuscript book on his life, we actually did dipanggil majlis bedah buku, which is actually a book discussion, and we interpret what he has written. Okay, so interpretation of text. What do you communicate? So usually we communicate ideas, emotions, intentions. This is very basic, very important. Just imagine if you cannot communicate your emotion or even your intention to do something or even your ideas. And this is what people with communication problems have problems with, not able to convey. So if children, they will throw a tantrum, if they cannot get people to understand what they want, and also for adults will have difficulty, let's say if they have a stroke and they have difficulty conveying their ideas and emotions, intention. So how do you communicate? Through language, isn't it? So messages, interpretation of messages, construction of messages. Okay, so this is a schematic diagram of communication. This is a speaker. The speaker has an intent to communicate. he then unconsciously in his the language component of his brain, he selects the kind of language which is suitable for his intention, and then he produces the language, or he writes. Yeah? So then you have a message as text, and then the interpreter is the person that receives the text. He analyzes the text, he interprets the content, the intent of the sender. So this is the domain of written communication, or sign system. If you're signing, it's the same also, like using American Sign Language or using bahasa isyarat Malaysia, bahasa Malaysia kan. Language as a thing, language as an element in social constructs. This is important when we can see that a few things happen as social constructs in terms of language planning. So language planning is usually done by authorities. So in Malaysia, we have Dewan Bahasa dan Pustaka, who actually plans for Malay language. The government plans for language in terms of Ministry of Education, which is one of the biggest ministry, and they deal with the education system. So they decide what language should be the medium of instruction. So we've seen quite a few changes. During my time, it was English. That was very long time ago. And then Malay. So during my secondary years in the 70s, there was a switch from English to Malay, and then completely Malay. 70s, from 70s, 80s, 90s, Malay as medium of instruction in schools. And then in 1995, the then Prime Minister, Tun Dr. Mahathir, or Datuk Seri Dr. Mahathir masa tu, he decided to have in 1995 a change. He wanted to have what we call PPSMI. PPSMI is basically teaching of maths and science in English. And then after so many years, they did. Then there was a change. So the change of language used in schools, for example, is part of language planning. Although in the overall country, we know that Malay is the bahasa rasmi, bahasa kebangsaan, and English is second language. But sometimes for certain purposes, that can vary. And then we look at code switching because we are so multilingual. All of us are multilingual. Even Malay people are multilingual. Even if you don't speak English, for example, just the interaction between dialects. So I have my Melaka dialect, and then I have the formal Malay. So there's already two varieties of language of language that I know. What more Chinese? Your Chinese friends, you Chinese students, you might have your Mandarin, and then your Chinese dialects, and then you have Malay, and you have English. You have at least 4 to 5 languages. So we code switch when we are code switch means we speak in one language, and then we transfer to another language. We move on to another language. And this one we will see. This happens lah. And then dialect debates. Dialect debates means which dialect should we choose? Variasi bahasa apa yang kita perlu pilih untuk menjadi bahasa baku? In a particular time, there was some discussion about which dialect of the Malay dialect should be bahasa baku. Okay, so then we see that this is basically in diagram, language as grammar. I think we've looked at this. And then language as a thing in social. And then language in use in terms of communication, in terms of written text, in terms of culture. Okay. So Wisniewski in 2007, he says that using a language as a primary means of communicating our thoughts is so natural that it is often difficult to realize the functions, what in fact are language functions. Some of the roles of language are so mundane that we hardly ever notice. Some are high prestige, some are low prestige, some are concrete, some are abstract. Yeah? So we can actually look at functions in terms of micro functions, which refer to specific individual users, and macro functions, which serve more overall aims. Yeah? So I always have this analogy of, you look at the forest from the top, if you are in a helicopter and you're looking down to the forest, that is called macro view. So general is macro, which is overall, more overall aims. And then micro is when you go down and you go inside the forest and you see each of the trees in the forest. So that is micro. So in language terms, the macro is the society using the language. The micro is the individual speaker which uses the language. And then we also have physiological function when we are, we are conveying something. We are conveying something. So we are releasing physical and nervous energy. Watching, for example, when we are watching football game, we don't have to be talking, but we can just grunt or shout or, scream in joy. Those are physiological function. However, it does communicate some information. And then we have phatic communion. Language as phatic communion. Phatic communion means it is so purely social. The use of phrases such as nice day today or how do you do is characterized by, it is lack of any informative content. But it is intended to link people and make the coexistence peaceful and pleasant. So for example, if I am walking to my class and then I meet another colleague, I'll say, apa khabar? And then he's supposed to say, khabar baik, alhamdulillah, macam tu. For some community like Chinese, they'll say, hey, have you eaten? Then the person say, yeah or no, but there's no content. But it's just to cement social interaction. I remember when I was a student in the US, and when I'm walking to my lecture hall, and these American people, either they're walking or they're jogging or they're bicycling, they'll say, hi, how are you today? And I'm like, at first, I guess the culture, I didn't understand. I don't know them, they don't know me. So why are they saying hi to me, But apparently, as time goes on, I realized that that's how you communicate when you meet people. Yeah? And it's called phatic communion. Even ants, if you see them walking, crawling, you can see that they actually stop. When they meet, they stop for one split second, and they so that's phatic communion. Recording function is a language which is used to record something. We either we write, or nowadays we can tape ourselves, we can video ourselves, and that's the recording function. That means nak merakamkan bahasa tu kan, sama ada dari segi penulisan ataupun video ataupun audio. There are some reasons why or some reasons why so someone learning to read the Quran will actually record herself reading the Quran and then checking back the reading to the text and see whether there were some mistakes that were done. So recording function. Identifying function. Language is also a thing that we use to identify. So language is used to identify objects and events in the world we live in. So we use names to classify different types of things. We call a car an automobile, a lorry a van, or a truck. There's a difference. What it's saying is that there's a difference between calling something a car and calling something an automobile. A car is just a car, any car. But an automobile is usually high-end. A Mercedes, a BMW, a Bentley, by naming things, let's say naming a house. this is my house, and then someone will say this is my home, and then someone will say this is my abode, abode, abode. So that when you the words that you use actually reflect some meaning there. So someone who says this is my house, very neutral. Huh? This is my home. Home means love. This is where I feel positive about my home, you know. So I want to call it my home. And then this is my abode. Abode is like usually a bungalow or a or a condo. Very nice place lah, you know. So so it depends. It will reflect. Yeah? So identifying function, reasoning function. Before we say something, we think and we use the necessary language. Yeah? It is very practical, very pragmatic. We as a social human being, a social being, we always reason. You know, when you want to ask some allowance from your parents, your dad, for example, you will reason. How should I approach that I needed some money? So you would use the ways that always make you get your way to get money. Yeah? So we reason. We reason when we want to we use language based on some reasoning that we do. Communication. We communicate. Communication means we are requesting, apologizing, informing, ordering, promising, refusing. These are all communicative function, or sometimes we call pragmatics. So we use language to convey communication function in terms of requesting, apologizing, and stuff. And the domains. Domains are situations in which language is actually used. So different codes. Codes are variety of language. Yeah? So different codes, different variety of language are used in different domains. So as I said, now I'm giving a lecture. So my domain is lecture. I'm giving a lecture, and the code that I'm using is, I think, like formal English. Huh? And then after I finish, right after I finish, I switch off. I go outside to my living room, and my husband is there. I'll speak to him in a different code, because now the situation is family domain. Yeah. And then let's say I want to go to the post office to send off some stuff. I go to the post office. It's post office domain. So then the way I speak will also be different. Yeah, so Fishman in 1972 studies domains as classes of situations, how individuals interact in appropriate role relationships. That means when we interact according to that relationship that is already established. So I'm now interacting with you. I'm a lecturer, you're a student. So that is already appropriated role relationship. When I speak to my husband, I'm the wife and he's the husband. So there's some ways of proper use of language that I should observe. And then when I go to the post office, I'm talking to someone in public, a government officer. I would use not colloquial, but you know, quite semi-formal way of asking, how do I send this parcel to South Africa, let's say, kan? And discuss topics which are appropriate to their role relationship. So there are things that are appropriate that you can speak to a child, but maybe some topics are not appropriate. So these are all the sociolinguistic factors, social factors that we have to take into account when we are using language. Who we talk to, what is the situation, and what is our relationship, and what is suitable to be discussed. Pleasure functions, this is very, we hear songs, so as that pleasure, we hear someone recite a poem, poetry, we read literature, so that one. Ideational function refers to the conceptualizing process involved in our mental activities. So language enables us to understand what is happening around us. So when we are observing something and there's some reasoning happening in our mind, our brain, we are reasoning, and then we use language to either comment on it or even thinking. We also think by using language, okay? Interpersonal function, it emphasizes that language is mainly a social phenomena. And apart from enabling communication with other people, it enables to project the speaker in the desired way and to represent the speaker. So interpersonal function is very important in a society. There are some social norms that we observe, unwritten rules that we know, that we learn as we grow older, that we need to have interpersonal communication, interpersonal relationship, and that will translate into the role of the speaker, hearer, the situation and stuff. Yeah? But language actually foster relationship, foster relationship between individuals, as we saw in the fatigue communion. Let's say, for example, fatigue communion tu macam you're at the bus stop, you're waiting for the bus, you don't know anyone there, but you want to be talking to people, so you say, hey, lambatnya bus ni, that's fatigue communion. And then that person next to you will say, betul lah, bus ni memang so lambat lah. Then you start talking, so that is interpersonal lah. Okay. Leslie Milroy in 1987 talks about social networks. Even before social media, okay, he talks about social networks based on the nature of social networks connection within a group of people. So the people that a social network can be looked at from two dimensions, which is dense social network and multiplex social network. So dense social networks, when all the people in a group are linked to each other and everyone knows everyone else. So in your class, I consider you as the group of linguistic asas or / pengenalan kepada linguistik. To me, you're just a dense social network. It means I know you, you know each other, you're in the same class, you have similar things to talk about because you're in year 1, you're taking the same classes, so dense social networks. Okay. Then you have the multiplex social networks. So multiplex social networks, when individuals, they are related to each other in some ways, but they are also related to other people in different ways. So for example, take me, for example, I have my students and we sort of know each other, yeah. But I also have my friends, my high school friends, my university friends, I'm actually a secretary of my resident association, so I have my resident association friends, the surau people. So these are multiplex, and they might not know each other. So that's why we call multiplex, many social networks. I think don't want. This one you can read by your own lah. Why do I have this? Wait. Oh, I see. Okay. Maybe I will talk about the example. Wait, Leroy. Yes. So Miro studied social networks in Belfast in the aspect of stigmatized vernacular forms. Accent variants were maintained. As the professor just now had spoken in the video, the thing with dialects is that there are dialects which are prestigious dialects, and then there are dialects which are low prestigious. How do I say it's prestigious? Because it's high social economic status. That means wealthy people, rich people, you know. Then you have the middle socio-economic status. These are the average middle class communities. And then you have the low class people, usually they are blue collars workers lah. So the variant of language that they speak, as shown in Lebov's study, reflects the status. So Milroy studies social networks in the aspect of stigmatized vernacular forms, where it is maintained, when it is used. She found that the highest incidence of the vernacular form are the language of the local people. So in Malaysia, Mandarin is a vernacular, Tamil is a vernacular, and other languages. So she looked at the highest incidence of the vernacular norms occurred in communities with the highest network strength scores. That is Protestant men in this area, who both worked and lived in the same neighborhood of young Catholic women whose partners were mainly unemployed. So they were looking at men and young Catholic women whose partners. A close-knit social network operates as a norm reinforcement mechanism, encouraging innovative linguistic features and helping to maintain the features and diffuse them into wider society. So close-knit networks are very common in low-status communities. This explains partly language loyalty as resistance to the pressure from standardization. So I think in this study, they were looking at people in a low-income community. I think the man is in low income, and then you have the young Catholic woman. Maybe I don't know. They are from a different socioeconomic status lah. But they found that language loyalty to the dialect vernacular form. They tend to use vernacular form over the standard form of the language. Okay. Yeah. So sometimes there is a resistance against the standard language and the dialect. Okay. And I think the professor just now, he talks about if you are looking at the news on TV, probably the language will be standard language. Yeah. You will not be, the newscaster will not be using dialect Kelantan at the news segment of the national TV, right? So there is also that differentiation between the low dialect and the standard dialect. Okay, so the notion of sociolinguistics is very much a part of speech therapy, but I think also in audiology, because you remember that you are looking at someone, and this patient or client comes in, that patient comes from a family, and that family comes from a community. So when he comes to you, he's coming to you with his, not just himself, but his family demographic, family knowledge or information, and then from the community's information. So when you are dealing with the client, you should think about this. So for example, what do I mean? So for example, if you're a speech language therapist and you're dealing with a kid, a kindergarten kid, so you would actually do a sociolinguistic in your interview. Sometimes checklist interview, you actually ask the person what are the languages or the codes that the patient is speaking. So if it's a child, you ask the parent what is the language that the child speaks at home, kan? If it's an adult, you can straight ask him about the languages lah. So the repertoire of languages are always being asked at the initial part of therapy. And then the domains of language that the client is involved in. This means that if you look at this child who is, let's say, 5 years old, he comes to your clinic, he has this problem, language delay lah, let's say. Now you need to know who this or what domain the client is always in, who he sees, where he goes. So you ask the mom, okay, he's 5 years old, is he going to kindergarten? And then the mom says yes. Partly he also goes to Impiana lah, let's say, which is a early intervention center, kan? So now you know that he goes to a kindergarten, he goes to an early intervention program. And then during the weekend, what do you do during the weekend? Oh, during the weekend we sometimes go visit the grandparents. So you know now the grandparents, and then extended family sometimes for kenduri and stuff. So you know that who does he play with? He has friends, cousins that he play with. When you're at work, who takes care of him? My live-in domestic helper takes care of him. So you know that there's a local domestic helper or a foreign domestic helper. These are all the information that you should gather if you want to accurately describe this client in your report or in your management of this client. So the domains of language is very important. The repertoire of languages is very important. The networks, the social networks that the client has is also important. And what are the use? Then you will be asking the parents, if it's a child, what is your aim for this therapy? So usually mothers or parents will say, he's not speaking right now. I want my child to be speaking like his other friends, they would say lah. But then you as speech therapist, you have to explain there are many stages to come to that point lah. But what is your immediate aim, you say? Oh, immediate aim, I want him to be able to use language at home. When he wants something, he can ask me. So he wants, maybe the mom wants the child to request by language. So that's one of your aim lah. You know? And then education. You will be asking the parents, okay, now he's in kindy, he's 6 years old, next year he's going to primary school. So which kind of primary school are you sending the kid? And then some will say international school. So of course, then international school English. Some will say national school Malay. So this planning for the future for the function of language is important for you to know, so that you are able to decide with the parent what language you want to use in the therapy room. Yeah, so these are very, like the speeches, they're very into the sociolinguistic things. But I can assure you, even the audiology students, when your client comes in, you still need to know some of this information. Because you're talking about his hearing aids or his cochlear implant. Who does he go? Which place does he go in a day? In a day of the week, where does he go? He goes to school. He goes, and then you say, "Oh, the teacher." The teacher has to understand the needs of a hearing impaired child. In terms of the classroom, where the child should be at. And the teacher should know something about children with hearing impairment. Means when you're speaking, don't have your back towards the child. When you're speaking to the child, look at the child and speak. Because once you have your back to the child, let's say you're talking to the child and you're writing on the board for the teacher lah, the child cannot hear you very well, because sometimes the child has to lip read also. And when the child has a cochlear implant, the teacher, when she's talking, she should sit next to the cochlear implant, next to the side of the ear that has a cochlear implant. So these are the things that indirectly audiologists would know lah. Okay, so I think a very short lecture on sociolinguistics, the relationship between language and society. But I think the speeches will get it more when they go to the other courses. But it's something that is relevant. It shows that language is alive. And as I said, if the language is not alive, usually the people are no longer around. Okay, so with that I end my lecture lah. Any question? Any question about this? So next week is your midterm break. So have a good break, 1 week break, and then you come back week 9, I think. Week 9. So I think we can think about our midterm in week 9. So I will talk to the reps about what is the possible time to do a midterm, maybe the week of Monday 7th to that week. So we can choose any time. We can also do it during the night. So anyway, that's one midterm. and then we're going to have a final exam. Don't forget, final exam at the end of the course. We could have some tutorial at the end of the course if you want, for my part. Dr. Butt, the way he does it before was he get you to do group work and do presentation. So he will have assessment of your presentation, yeah, or also presentation and your write up of your assignment. Okay, so that is the assessment for linguistic asas or pengenalan kepada linguistik. Okay, with that I end, and I would like to say thank you to everyone for your attention and your presence. I just want to say that I wish you all the best in your coming semesters in speech science. I will actually retire in 2 months' time. I will finish working with UKM. I'm 60 on 1st of February. So on 1st of February 2021 is my last day working as a UKM staff. Okay. So after that, I anticipate that I will be still teaching part-time. So yeah, for some of the linguistic courses until they find some a full-time staff. So I thank you so much, and hope you have a good years and become, and graduate to be a speech language therapist and audiologist. Okay, thank you. Have a nice day.
Doctor,
Yes.
sorry, can I ask regarding the quiz tadi, saya dah saya dapat submit quiz tu, tapi
Yeah.
kan kita kena kita kena upload gambar tu kan. Saya tak boleh nak upload gambar, so saya just tulis jawapan saya dekat ruang kosong tu je. So did I need to email you ataupun macam mana?
I think you better email, as I've replied to you, kan? Please email me your trees.
Oh, so kena hantar gambar jugalah even
Yes.
saya.
Yeah, when you email me, it has to be either Word doc pun boleh. You can do it on Word doc, or you can do it in PowerPoint. And then you send the file to me, but send it by today. Like soon after this, you do it and then you sign. You send. I don't want people to send it too late, and I would consider that. I think latest by 2 today. Anyone who have problems uploading the 3 diagram, please do it before 2. Because if it's too late, it might not be valid. Yeah. Okay. Any more questions?
Thank you, doctor.
Thank you. Any more questions? All right. So with that, thank you so much.
Doctor.
Yes.
This is Carissa speaking. I'm sorry to interrupt you. Just now for my quiz, I said it was stuck for me, right? But once I refreshed the page, I realized that all of my answers have been recorded except for the upload. So should I email you instead and not redo the quiz, or how should I go about
the quiz? You cannot redo the quiz because that quiz is already closed. So automatically, even when you want to